I'm glad you've come today. You have a loved one, or perhaps you yourself need this information, and that's why you are here. You have an agenda and a number of other pieces of information, resource pages, etc., are here, and I know that I'll need to go and make some additional copies, so I'm going to go do that now in just a moment. And while I am doing that, I'm going to ask you to welcome, please, Miss Zanda Seberg, who is affiliated with both the Alzheimer's Association. She works with them, but she also works with the North Texas
Area Agency on Aging.
Area Agency on
AAA
Aging.
don't do cars.
So, won't you welcome her? And well, you can help me if you don't mind. She's going to introduce herself and how she works with both these agencies and as an independent individual to help families where you are today. Zanda, we thank you. I thank you. We've been working back and forth for several weeks now. Thought she was going to be able to come earlier this year, and it didn't happen because of COVID, but she's able to be here today, and I thank you for your time. You're going to find that she is a very wealthy source of information, okay? We'll have, as you see in your agenda, there'll be a time of Q&A, and if you have questions, if you will, please just raise your hand. I'll bring a mic, and you can ask your question so everyone can hear, okay? But she's going to share a little bit about herself and the program this evening. Zanda, thank you.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure, and it's great that so many of you, I'm setting a timer for myself, by the way, because once I get started, I sometimes go on a roll. I'm Zanda Hilger Seberg. Yeah, I married later in life, so I held my stage name of Hilger, but I'm very proud of Seberg. I've been working on behalf of the Area Agency on Aging and affiliated with Alzheimer's Association since the passage of the National Family Caregivers Act back in 2001. Well, actually, it was 2000. 2001, across this country, started rolling out programs. And I was privileged enough, we're in a house of God, so I can tell you that I was truly led to this work. And on the way over here, when I do a program like this, I will say, it's not me, it's the message. I have a master's degree in counseling, and I'm a licensed professional counselor. I was a training director. I was in private practice, and many of these things helped position me to be a subcontractor to Area Agency on Aging, which I've done now for 20 years. In that capacity, I developed caregiver programs. We're online, so I'm going to show you the website we use. Donnie I think he's sitting around, well, he's going to provide that. I do a bi-weekly electronic newsletter with all kinds of things, events, but also things that are very important to caregivers. We never share your name with anybody. It's privileged information as far as we're concerned. I want to give you a little disclaimer also. I was caregiver for my mother. She was sick most of her life, and as she got older, she died at age 84, and so I learned a lot on the ground, on the job. And then my husband, when I met him, he was a rock climber. That was 25 years ago. He now has a severe back problem, has a cane, and he's as independent as he can be. And all that's to say, circling back, is last weekend we went down to Austin to see the grandchildren. And 9 times out of 10, Zemo comes back with a cold. And so I tried to rest this week, but yesterday I asked my husband, Chuck, if I start to talk to you, give me a high sign. Now, let me tell you that in retirement, he's a school crossing guard. So guess what the high sign was? I'm afraid I have created a monster. Anyway, let's leap into this. First of all, there's far more material than we'll ever be able to cover in our time together, but you will have it. And it is material that's coming, a lot of it from the Alzheimer's Association, is from various sources, but you will have, and I've violated every rule of doing PowerPoint presentations. I put too much stuff on a slide, but I want you to have the information. And that's why it's all there. Yes, you can go online, but has anybody been online to the Alzheimer's Association website lately? Do you find it user-friendly? So when you go on, you can find what you need? Okay. Yeah. It's been redesigned in such a way, you have to really drill down sometimes to find what you need. Hopefully this will help make that simpler for you. Okay, let's get into this. Donna came up with this idea, straight talk, about dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and other cognitive disorders. The website that I have underlined, we're going to go to briefly. What we're going to talk about is early signs and symptoms of dementia, the importance of medical evaluation, how to deal with difficult behaviors of dementia, medications, pros and cons, the importance of education and support groups, when placement is needed, self-care and stress management, and resources, all in an hour. We basically have a program here that could go an entire day, but we are going to hit the high points. How many of you in here are caring for someone who has a chronic illness of some kind? What are those chronic illnesses? Okay, Alzheimer's, all right. So how many of you in here are caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease already that's been diagnosed? Okay, how many of you are caring for someone with dementia? And we'll go into the differences here in a minute. What about the rest of you? What's the reason that you're here today? I saw you back there. What are the reasons, what are you looking for, the rest of you that didn't raise your hand?
Just information overall.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
It has gone already.
Okay,
We just want to know more about it.
okay. Because it's everywhere, I think you would admit. Yes, ma'am.
As we age, we all, I guess, if we're honest with ourselves, there's a dread or a sort of fear in our minds that it might happen to us. So we want to know what are some of the early signs.
My hat's off to you. Many of you are talking about prevention. You want to learn things up front so that you can intervene quickly. It makes a huge difference in care. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. Early signs and symptoms. Everything that is on the page, on the slide, you have yourself. Okay, dementia is a general term that means that the person has trouble with language, memory. Cognitive means thinking. Cognitive means thinking. It interferes with daily life. And here's an important statement. Alzheimer's is the most frequent or the highest percentage of dementia, okay? So it's often confusing. Everyone who has Alzheimer's has dementia. Hold on just a second. But not everybody that has dementia has Alzheimer's. Is that clear? Yes, sir.
My question is, how do they know the difference?
We're going to get to that. And if you would, jot down your questions, and I'll stay as late as you need me to. And there will be a Q&A at the end, and I have set myself a timer, so that's an excellent question, hopefully. What are signs of dementia? They start out slowly and gradually get worse. How many in this room feel that you already have dementia? How many of you gone into a room and come back out and couldn't remember? How many of you walked out and didn't bring what you thought you should? How many of you find the more stressed or in the hurry you are, the more you tend to forget things? That does not necessarily mean you have dementia or Alzheimer's. I heard somebody say, if you put your keys in the refrigerator and then come back and you find them and you know what they're for, you don't have Alzheimer's. But if you put them in the refrigerator and you don't know what they are, that might be something to investigate. The importance of not ignoring symptoms, can't emphasize that enough. Dementia is usually diagnosed by ruling out other illnesses. I don't know how many of you realize that, even Alzheimer's. It's ruling out other illnesses. Signs of dementia can vary, but examples include short-term memory. They can remember way back. Short-term memory, keeping track of a purse or a wallet, paying bills, planning and preparing meals, remembering appointments, or traveling out of the neighborhood. Okay, and we're going to drill down on these. All right, these are the Alzheimer's Association's most frequently requested, and these will be very valuable symptoms for you to have about Alzheimer's. There is a booklet, pamphlet back there about that. You're getting duplicate information, but here are the 10 signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Memory loss that disrupts daily life. Daily life is disrupted. Challenges in planning or solving problems. Someone with Alzheimer's had a lot of difficulty solving what they used, which it could be something simple like, how do I get from here to there? Or figuring out the budget, or something that used to be very common for them, but they struggle with it. That's a very common early sign. Difficulty completing familiar tasks at home or work at leisure. Now, we all have a baseline personality. And some of us, we start something, and then we go to something else, and we go to something else. That's kind of some people's personalities. But they eventually come back to it, or their spouse encourages them to come back to it. What this means in Alzheimer's is they might start something but never go back to it because they don't remember it. Something else that's important, there is a confusion with time and place. Confusion, and we're going to talk about how you deal with some of this. Confusion in time and place, where they are, what time it is, kind of a time slippage sometimes. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relations. Having more difficulty with balance and judging distances that's not related to vision. Maybe tripping over things because the brain, what is happening is that the brain is being affected by what are called amyloid proteins that start forming on the brain. And as they grow, there are tangles. Plaques and tangles is what you frequently hear. And, there's more medical tech, but we don't need that right now. That's for another class. But what happens is, as those cover the brain, it starts affecting those parts of the brain that have to do with these. And some people, it will start slow. Some people, and another point that's important, if you know someone with Alzheimer's, you know someone with Alzheimer's. There are maybe certain symptoms, but not every person with Alzheimer's may develop these symptoms at the same rate or have them to the same degree. Number 6 is new problems with words in speaking or writing. Have trouble following a conversation, struggling to stay part of this conversation, struggling to find a word. And they're aware of this, and sometimes they start withdrawing. They're aware that they can't remember things. Number 7, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace their steps. Most of us, when we lose something, very often we do retrace our steps and go back over to that refrigerator. But that's not something that they automatically do. Number 9 kind of goes back to what I was just talking, withdrawal from work or social activities. And number 10, which is the most difficult sometimes for family caregivers and for other people in their world, is changes in mood and personality. They have a tendency to get more easily upset in very common situations. And we'll talk about some of the needs. Something to realize about Alzheimer's too, and this speaks to it, but I want to make it as clear as I can. They kind of lose the ability to take the initiative. Those of you that have had a family member, would you speak to that? Did you find that was the case? They go along to get along, but they lose that initiative, and it's so awful, especially for that person that used to be get up and go. But they lose initiative, and that is a part of the reason why so much of the work with Alzheimer's and dementia is helping caregivers learn as much as they can and learn coping strategies. Alzheimer's has been called the caregiver's disease. Can some of you relate to that? Because the caregiver has to learn ways to self-care, stress management, and more about the disease. Parkinson's disease, it is a progressive neurological nervous system disorder that affects movement. It's different than dementia, but we'll get to the reason why it belongs together. Symptoms start gradually, sometimes starting with a noticeable tremor in just one hand. Tremors are common, but the disorder also causes stiffness and slowing of movement. It may be no more noticeable when they're fatigued or when they're stressed. Now, Parkinson's disease dementia, it means there's a decline in their ability to think and reason because, again, the disease process is affecting those parts of the brain that affect reason, memory, all those what we call higher functioning. As the brain changes caused by Parkinson's gradually spread, they start to affect more and more mental functions. And so they have Parkinson's disease and they have Alzheimer's. They have Parkinson's disease, not Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, dementia. Tremors. How many of you have ever known someone with Parkinson's disease? Okay. A lot of you can identify tremors and shakiness, muscle stiffness, shuffling step, astute posture, difficulty initiating movement, and lack of facial expression. What maybe you'll find with someone with Parkinson's disease is they're less and less visible. They stay home. They're not engaged. Perhaps their caregiver or their family is not as engaged because they're caring for them. Okay, let's talk about behaviors. All of you will have, Donnie, perfect timing. Where are those behavior changes? You're going to get these in a pamphlet. I thought it'd be nice to have that you could follow along in a pamphlet. He's going to bring you this that says behaviors. And all of this is here because, again, you will have it handy. And this will actually go on our website, and we'll be pulling blogs from this. We have a lot of information about Alzheimer's, but this will go on it. So, number one. Well, before we even get that, negative behaviors have many causes. The negative behaviors that cause so much problem. Change can be one of the biggest stressors that will trigger behavior. Again, those of you that have lived with somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia, did you find that was the case? I see a lot of nodding. they have trouble with change, changing location, changing their chair, anything that has to do with change. Physical pain or discomfort may also be a trigger for some of these behaviors. They're hungry, they're thirsty, but they don't know how to tell you that. Overstimulation. Taking someone with Alzheimer's to a family event where there's a lot of activity going on is something you may need to really think about. Maybe you take them, but they're over in another room with a few members of the family. But when they're overstimulated, that's when sometimes you'll see the more negative, troublesome behavior. Anything that's unfamiliar to them, to their day-to-day life. This actually, I don't think is, this I put in, I don't think it's in that pamphlet. Unfamiliar surroundings, new places, or the inability to recognize home. Complicated tasks, difficulties with activities and chores. Part of my role with Area Agency on Aging is I've counseled many caregivers in their homes, and I'll always remember, I don't want to spend too much time on this, a woman who I went to see her, and her mom had moved in with them, and she had her own room, and she'd go in and say, "Mom, it's time to get ready. Go wash your face, put your gown on, and I'll come back and check on you." So she would come back, she's shaking her head. So she'd come back, gown was still sitting there. What's going on there is it's too complicated. "Mom, it's time to go to bed. Put on your gown. Let's put on your gown." She was overwhelmed, too much information, had lost that ability, those steps, those processes. And that's what sometimes frustrates caregivers. And it's frustrating to that patient too, or that person with frustration interactions. The inability to communicate effectively may cause fear, sadness, and anxiety. The whole range of behaviors. Okay. Remember this. It's difficult behaviors, not a difficult person, okay? And remember too, it's not them, is it? When someone has a dementia, and there are many forms, Lewy body's dementia is being, yes ma'am. I'm kind of talking off. I'm talking off. Well, it will be provided to you. I don't know why it's not in there.
It's just labeled.
It may be in a different place.
It's labeled differently. I mean, the bullet points are the same, but it doesn't have the difficult behavior.
There's a couple of versions.
So it's just not.
Yeah.
How to deal with someone with difficult behavior.
Yeah. Donnie didn't apparently download the latest. I was telling him earlier, anytime I write a program, you gotta walk away from it. Because if you keep messing with it, it's going to change. You're yanking it better, but sometimes it changes. If you need to make notes, but I think you'll find all of this. This is just a good summary. Alzheimer's disease can cause people to act in different and unpredictable ways. That actually is in here. It's in this. Some individuals become anxious or aggressive. Others repeat certain questions or gestures. Many misinterpret what they hear. These types of reactions can lead to misunderstanding, frustration, and tension. It's important to understand that the person is not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to be difficult. It is the disease, and that's something you may have to continue to remind yourself. This is not my mother, this is the disease. This slide is also something that I put in because it is a good summary of basic tools for dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia and difficult behavior, which is reassure the person, review possible causes in your own mind. What's the trigger? And we're going to go into details. What's the trigger? When there is a difficult behavior, something has happened. It may have been an unexpected thing that happened that they weren't prepared for. There's a trigger. redirect, 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 redirect. Can't say that often enough. When someone is doing a certain behavior that's not healthy or happy for you, instead of arguing with them, you redirect them to something else. And there's lots of ideas. As a matter of fact, I can point you to one right now. There's an additional handout that says 101 things to do with someone with Alzheimer's. And it's going to depend on where they are in the disease. Restore yourself. We'll come back to this too. Review what happened after that behavior happens, and then reach out for help. The thing about caregivers that's kind of interesting is they're usually the can-do, will-do, responsible person who never asks for help from anybody until they have to. That's the majority of caregivers. You may be different, or you may have gotten to that point that you're doing it differently. But this is definitely, it takes a village. All right, we're now in behaviors, this workbook. Everything that's on the slides is in this pamphlet. And again, I thought this would be a good break. Number 1. Now, the Alzheimer's Association has identified a 3-step approach to help you identify behaviors and their causes right out of the gate. Number 1, examine the behavior. What was it? Was it harmful? Was there a trigger? I said that before. And we're looking at page 2 in this pamphlet. And again, not going to go step by step on this. You can read this and hit this and pick up all the details because there's much more I want to share with you. Number 2, explore solutions. Now, we understand that a behavior happens. You can't stop and, I'm going to examine the behavior and I'm going to explore the solutions. This is something you do afterward that you learn and you apply the next time. Look at it that way. Try different responses. You've probably heard before, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get the same result, right? So very often, caregivers keep repeating the same thing over and over, and people that are listening in, they're not going to see this. Did you find yourself doing that? You try the same thing over and over, and guess what? It wasn't working. And there's kind of a learning curve. Be gentle with yourself. Give yourself some grace through all of this. Try different responses. Number 2, anger and aggression. It may be verbal. It may be physical. It is important, again, to be aware of what's going on with that person in that period of time. It's important to try to figure out the cause. What's causing this anger? How to respond is rule out that pain is a cause for this. Cannot emphasize enough that very often with people with Alzheimer's, people with advanced dementia of any kind, it is pain that they can't express. They can't identify. They just can't. And so it becomes acting out. So rule that out. Try to identify an immediate cause, going back to the word trigger that I talked about. What had just happened? Focus on feelings, not facts. Now, for some of us that we're always looking for data and information and the facts, this is one of those times you've got to get off book and off script about that. What are the feelings? What are the feelings behind the word? And very often, you're going to find it's fear that triggers some of the anger, that triggers some of the aggression, it's fear, because they feel out of place. You, yourself, try not to get upset. Be positive and reassuring. Right now, everybody, I would suggest you all join me in taking a deep breath. Rule number 1 of stress management and self-care is deep breathing. I guarantee if you hit the pause button and take 3 deep breaths, it is going to focus you. It is physiological. Try a relaxing activity with that person. Music, their favorite music. Again, redirect the behavior. If it's causing an aggressive reaction, try something different. And whatever activity you're doing, redirect to another one. Speak calmly. Hard to say when you're stressed, to speak calmly. But that's one way I guarantee, if you get in the habit of taking a deep breath, hitting the pause button, slowing down. And by the way, what happens to women's voices when they get upset? It goes up. And sometimes, not always, some of the people we care for may have hearing loss. So that's going to make it even harder. And there's a tendency that higher register tends to have more of that anxiety response. So,
Xanda, excuse me, may I ask a question
Yes.
of the group
mhm.
to assist you? How many of you, of course, we've already said that dementia is the overarching umbrella. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, some of the other things that will be mentioned are underneath that umbrella. How many of you are dealing with a loved one that has Alzheimer's? Would you raise your hand? Okay. And what
We
about
did that.
Well, okay.
We did that.
I
But
just-
for
I
him,
didn't-
for Donnie,
me, I was
think
out
this would
making
be-
copies,
You
so I
were.
can.
You were busy making copies.
Yeah.
But if you want to go ahead and ask again,
And the other part of that is, what about those of you who are concerned with your loved ones or yourself as it relates to dementia? Okay. Sundowners.
so
Yeah.
have they been diagnosed with Alzheimer's? Okay. 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 Mm-hmm. Okay. And we'll be talking about that
Yeah.
too.
I just needed
And-
to know that.
Absolutely, and not only that, one of the things that Donnie has concerns about is we want to make sure that this programming is meeting your needs. And Donnie, what I found really fascinating is I would say about half of the people in this room are coming here for the information.
good.
They don't really have someone that they're caring for. They're here to learn. They're here for the prevention aspect. That doesn't happen very often. Maybe as the disease progression has come on, there's more of you out there, but in the beginning days when I was doing this, people weren't there for prevention. They were there because they were hanging on by a thread.
Okay. Thank you for letting me interrupt.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, where were we? Anxiety or agitation. They may become anxious or agitated. Again, how to respond. And what you'll find in all of these behaviors, you'll see the same intervention, the same what to do. But the way this is organized is if you're looking for this, something about this behavior, this is what you can do. But you'll find, like I had that slide, there are some common interventions or ways to cope or deal with whatever the behavior is. So for anxiety, again, go back to physical discomfort or pain. Are they in pain? Some things can trigger anxiety or agitation, and pain may be one of them. Maybe they've had an injury. Maybe they're sitting in an uncomfortable position. A reaction to a medication that they maybe have taken a long time, but for some reason they're starting to have a reaction to it. Listen to their frustration. Listen to what's behind their behavior. Provide the reassurance. We'll work on this together. Calming tones, take that breath. Involve the person in activities. What's the word? Redirect. Modify the environment. Sometimes turning off or down the radio or the TV. Some people I know have gotten their loved one like headphones that they can listen to music, or they're noise canceling. You figure out what works for the person you care for. Involve them in activities. Get them involved. I worked with a client that her husband had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he used to, of course, take care of all the family business. Of course, that's what his job was. But he could no longer do that, and that was part of what led them to the diagnosis. He was sending out the wrong checks. He was ignoring the bills. So what she did is she gave him a checkbook with some old checks from an old account. And at times she'd give him the current checkbook, but she would give him the bills, let him write them out, him put them in an envelope, and then she'd say, I'll take care of the rest of this. Let me do part of this. I'll address it and put a stamp on it. Now, tricky, yes, but it made him feel like he was doing something productive, and it was a bridge to his past. So think about things that you can do modifying that environment. Outlets for the energy. Can you take a walk with them? Walk out to the garden if they're not wandering. Figure out a way. And if it means getting a doctor involved or an occupational therapist, somebody that can help you design some kind of physical activity program, you might think about that. Number 4, forgetfulness and confusion. Not uncommon. That's one of the early signs, but also as the disease progressed. Not recognize familiar people. Not recognize things they always knew, places they've always been. May forget relationships. May forget that that's their grandson. Very hurtful for the families. May forget the purpose of something very common like a pen. And you never know when this is coming. The progression doesn't follow a checklist. Remember what I said a while ago? If you know a person with Alzheimer's, you know a person with Alzheimer's. So, how to respond with this? Stay calm. Take a breath. Stay calm. Slow down. Respond with a very brief explanation, just like the woman with her mother's gown. A very brief explanation. Don't overwhelm them with complex responses. My father-in-law, and I don't know why I didn't mention this, but they've been gone 3 years now. My father-in-law had Alzheimer's, and I won the lottery. I had the most wonderful parents-in-law, but they moved in with my husband's brother. And my mother-in-law would give him very detailed instructions because she was very detailed. And then we'd get so frustrated because he couldn't follow them. And we can all hear her voice. Dick! And she'd do it all over again. Have you ever noticed if you give directions to somebody and they don't understand, you give them again the same way, but louder? Did you ever notice that? Break it down. Break it down into a simple task. Step 1, maybe as far as you get. Another thing is have photos around. Have photos around. One of the things that you can do is have photos of family members that you refer to. Photos of trips that maybe the two of you took. Something that redirects their behavior but also shows them with another family member. I want you to real quickly write this down. We don't have time to spend on it. Retrogenesis. 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 You may have trouble finding it. If you do, let Donnie know, and I can. This is a theory that they're starting to do some research on, that people with Alzheimer's and dementia start regressing back to behaviors that were similar, not that you're children, but similar behaviors as children of certain ages. Those of you who have someone with Alzheimer's or you have, does that make sense to you? That you had to break it down. And what retrogenesis, this chart I saw, is if they are at this stage, it is the equivalent to this developmental level and this great list of activities that person works with that person. I just thought that was really interesting and very helpful. Okay, offer corrections or suggestions. Okay, this is a tough one, and it's going to take some practice. So they start referring to, it's a knife. We're on page 7. Offer corrections or suggestion. Let's say that it's a fork, but they call it a knife, okay? So, no, Dad, that's a knife. How about a softer approach is, I thought that was a fork. It's gentler. And, Dad, what you do with the fork is you're going to eat most of your meal with it. Calling someone by another name, a family member. Mom, I think that's Peter. I think that's your grandson, Peter. Does that make sense? A more softer approach instead of, no, that's not right. How many of you who have cared with somebody with Alzheimer's, how successful were your arguments with them? There's something called, the idea is accept their reality for what it is instead of trying to correct them. It's their reality. And you are not going to change their reality in the moment. Okay, try not to take it personally. Remember, it's not them, it's the disease. And repetitive actions, we need to move on. So, not uncommon, repeating a word, a question. This is very often the behavior that will cause the most stress for a caregiver. The same question over and 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 over. And the caregiver replies, but they don't remember. And they ask it again, over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And with my brother-in-law, it got to where he just didn't even respond. He was just worn out. Again, look for a reason that this person may be asking this. Focus on what may be going on with them. Are they afraid? Are they bored? With my father-in-law, he is bored. And then what else can you do? Redirect. Figure out something from that list or somebody in this room, things that you can do that already are there that you can refer them to and redirect that behavior. Stay calm, page 8, stay calm. Provide an answer, but a simple answer. Redirect, get them involved in an activity, and use memory aids. New suspicions. I'm just really concerned that we have so much to cover. So we have talked about the real important ones, not that the others wandering is not important. We're going to talk a little bit about it, but the rest of this, do yourself a favor and read through this or read through this because you will find what you need.
Sandra?
Yes.
Excuse me. We have 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Based on the content of what you want to do.
We're moving forward.
We want to leave enough time for questions
Q&A.
and answers and the resource information pages that you've provided for them.
Excellent. So, that's good timing. Let's talk about medications. What I provided from you is what I pulled from Alzheimer's Association. And the chart is the name of the medication, the indications for it, and the side effects. These medications, again, many people won't take all of these medications. The most common ones are Aricept and Namenda, and some of the things that are common, this Aduhelm is the newest one. I'm not good with this. What are some of the medications that those of you that have taken care of somebody with Alzheimer's? Huh?
What do these do?
Well, that's a whole nother. What it does, it's indicated for those behaviors, but as far as what they do, that's a whole class in itself. And that'd be something that could be scheduled. And my suggestion, if you have a real interest in that, let Donnie know. There are some wonderful pharmacists they'd be more than happy, because they're very often the best front line of defense. What I gave you is the most common ones that are used, and again, depends on the type of dementia, the level of the Alzheimer's, and when you have someone with dementia and Alzheimer's, it very much is they try this, and then based on they try this. It goes back to what I said, if you know somebody with Alzheimer's, or you know somebody with Alzheimer's. So I
And
can't.
we do have, Xander, we do have a couple of drug dealers
Drug dealers.
pharmacists in the
I love
church
it.
that we can call
I love
on to help you with this.
Excellent. I would suggest, I think that would be a great class, and they can do it in such a way that it's very understandable. But clinical studies, for those of you that already have somebody they're caring with, and we're not going to spend time on this, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting involved in a clinical study. It is boots on the ground, people with illnesses that are involved in clinical studies that are the future of Alzheimer's. It's not in some lab somewhere. It is real people. Something else to be aware of about dementia and Alzheimer's. When it is evaluating, you're going to have a lot of information about here, the importance about a medical evaluation. They rule out certain things. How many of you know that a UTI, the behavior from a UTI, can mimic Alzheimer's? Mm-hmm. And it's so common. How many of you know that depression can also mimic Alzheimer's? Many of those behaviors, the not taking the initiative, sleeping a lot. So be aware there are other things that happen. When should you take these medications? That seems like a given, but as prescribed by the physician who clearly understands the individual's diagnosis. One of the toughest things for caring for somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's is many of them want to continue to go to the doctor they've seen for the last 20 or 30 years. And you're convincing them very often has to come down to, do it for me. I want you to have that's what I did with my mother. I want you to have the best care possible. So I've scheduled an appointment. They're going to give everything. So when we get finished, they will know exactly what's going on, what you need. Doesn't that make sense? Because if you tell them that you're going to take them to see whether or not they have Alzheimer's, how well is that going to work for you? All right. Keep in mind the medications do not cure. They do not cure. They manage symptoms, and some of them, you said, what do they do, ma'am? Some of them slow down. And there's one of the slides that slows down the progression. Be sure also to make sure the medications are something that people can afford. This is one of my big beefs, is the drug reps go in and they convince the doc, you need to give your patient this. The patient doesn't know it costs $1,000 a month. How many of you have ever been caught up in that? So that's how we become advocates as family caregivers or as family members. What is an option? What is an option? Take it as prescribed, the same time every day. Many people with dementia can benefit from, at certain stages, from counseling, especially if there's depression. So keep that in mind. Support groups. What's the benefit of a support group? My quote is not on this one, but it's in the last final version. My quote is, every support group should be educational. I ran a support group for 10 years of caregivers, and I facilitated several for a matter of months. But if the people are just going into those support groups and talking about how their month was, and that's all they do, what's going to change? Nothing. So that you walk out of there with some information. It's a strong support, social support. It's an emotional support. It's a support source of information, resources like over here. It helps reduce stress and anxiety, just unloading on someone else. I told you we had a whole lot of information for an hour, but I did find perhaps an easier way for you to identify when is it time that person, you need to consider placement for that person. And A Place for Mom is very well known. It's on the internet. And there's 13 questions, and they are excellent. I'm going to let you go over them on your own. If you can answer these questions, that'll go a long way for you to know. The rest of the presentation is about self-care and stress management. Okay? They're kind of interchangeable. Unfortunately, just as in this presentation, it's the last thing that happens. And really, it should be the first thing that happens. How many of you have already heard, and then we're going to have our Q&A, see this image. How many of you have already heard this? When you get on a plane and they make the announcement about if the cabin loses pressure, what's going to happen? And what are you to do with it? Now, what is our natural inclination? Absolutely. But think of it this way. If you're sucking for air, you can't help this person. It's the same thing with people you care for as a caregiver. You have to start with yourself. Do you know the high number of people with Alzheimer's, their caregivers, who get sick and sometimes even die themselves because of the stress? Because they didn't take care of themselves? I can't tell you how many caregivers I've worked with and known of that after they were fine, their health was fine through the caregiving experience. But within a few months, after that person died or they went into a facility, they got really sick because the stressors, they affect the immune system. So if you do nothing more, start with the back slides because I've got some real easy tips. And if you get the family biweekly electronic newsletter, every one I have a self-care or stress management blog or article, short. Okay. Do you feel like we turned the water hose on you instead of the sprinkler? All right, questions? Yes, ma'am.
My mother's in Oklahoma, so do we have this kind of a support group in Oklahoma? I know A Place for Mom is up there because I've already used that
Okay.
and called them.
All right, let's go to the resources. That's an excellent question. Let's go to the resources.
And by the way, we do have a support group that meets here. We'll start next month meeting every Thursday. We did meet every Thursday, and we'll continue. We'll start that back in September. Go ahead.
Okay, resources. At the very back is several resources, including a link to a multi-page resource. Everywhere in America, and I don't think it got on here, and I apologize for that. Everywhere in America, you can dial 211. And that will get you, they'll answer, and you'll say, I need help finding resources for my mother in Oklahoma City, or whatever the, I provided you a lot of specific links, and if you don't follow the links, if you get the PowerPoint itself, you can go directly to the links, but there are the URLs. Community Services, ELSA. Okay. North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging. This is funded by the feds, some state funding, mostly federal. And they plan and provide services for people aged 60 and older and their family caregivers. Respite vouchers, in-home, I don't know if they've started that up again, evaluations, somebody to talk to about navigating the resources.
Xander, do you know the respite value?
No.
Is 3 days a month?
It depends. I couldn't tell you right now at this point in the fiscal year because it depends on available resources. So I'd be lying. I can't tell you that. Every area agency on aging does it differently. I also work through Area Agency on Aging of Dallas, and they do it differently. The Aging and Disability Resource Center is an umbrella. You may even want to start with this and it's nationwide because Area Agency on Aging in many communities, like in Tarrant County and in North Central Texas, the Area Agency on Aging actually coordinates this ADRC. You'll find the resources, support programs for caregivers in this. All these brochures are there for you. Yes.
Okay, everything that I have seen online and everything I have seen here is wonderful. And it's a lot of resources and information for caregivers. I personally have been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and I have found nothing to support the individual with the condition. Do you know of anything?
Go to the Alzheimer's Association, alz.org. They have the perfect URL. Go to that, and there is an 800 number. It's 24/7. Call that number. Early onset dementia, and if the first person you talk to doesn't give you information, call it again. How many of you have to deal with phone trees? Unfortunately, here's the problem, folks. The needs have expanded, but the resources have not. But they would be the place to start. Excellent question. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Hold on a second. Yeah, hold on just a second.
We inherited my uncle, and my mom and dad in their 90s tried to take care of him for 3 years, and then my sister-in-law and brother got him. But when we thought, let's see what the diagnosis is so we can know how to handle it. Primary care referred to a psychologist or a counselor. They sent a page that had 200 questions on it. And my dad called and said, he can't answer these. Can I answer them for it? And they said, oh, no, because then that's your opinion and not them. There's no way.
Okay. We didn't get to spend a lot of time on this, but this area, we are fortunate to have a lot of physicians and a lot of clinics who specialize in dementia. In Fort Worth, University of North Texas Health Science Center, they changed it to Aging Older Adult Clinic, I believe. Does anybody work with them yet? Dr. Janice Kniebel, the problem is the waiting list. What was your experience?
Well, I changed my mom's in the nursing at a memory care place.
Yes, ma'am?
And we started out there, and it was fine for appointments, but
Yeah,
when
for
she got
evaluation.
sick, they took forever to get her in, misdiagnosed her, and just between us and the nursing home, it was really bad communication and hard to, we loved the doctor, but just,
The system.
right, it
The
was
system.
hard to.
It's frustrating. I'm frustrated with the entire medical system. Do you agree, though, they did a pretty good evaluation?
Yes, in the beginning.
All right. If you do nothing else with your person, get them somewhere to have a thorough evaluation. Thorough. And when they go to a clinic, you don't send them to a psychiatrist to start with. What? You start with someone who has training in older adult medicine, at a minimum, someone who has experience with, they're called geriatricians, where they're board certified. In Weatherford, you have Sherry Hall. In Fort Worth, you have this entire clinic. They do evaluations that's looking at physical, emotional, and mental. Have you had an evaluation yet? Highly, highly, highly recommend that you do that. Because the beauty of this is you get an accurate diagnosis, number one, and you can start the medications and identify other treatments that might help. Might help that person and might help their caregiver.
Xander, we have, I have a personal friend that elected not to take the medication early on, starting 3 years ago. And the acceleration of the disease has just really came on very, very quickly. And and it's a little bit late at 3 years to begin that process. So they've started doing some medication, but it's had no effect on retarding the disease. Now, one of the things that I've begun to do, and I want to let you know this, is because of the explosion of the need in our culture, in our state, I have begun a compilation of information, resources, and I'm trying to write a book on this. So your questions, your concerns, your needs, I need to know so I can help you, and I can perhaps include this as a way or means to help others as well.
Absolutely.
And so you can see me afterwards. I'll give you my email address, and you can email me those questions or your concerns, okay? Thank you.
Family Caregiver Support Services, Medicare benefits. One of the services of every agency on aging is help their benefits counselors. They're highly trained to help identify the correct, they don't make the decisions about insurance for you, but they can help. There's programs. Quickly, well, what other questions do you have? Because I want to give you some websites. Yes, ma'am.
I have her uncle. He's 86 years old. He was a blackjack dealer in Vegas, womanizer, you name it. If somebody gets hurt physically, who gets hurt first, you or him? Because of, let's say he grabs you and he's going to punch you in the face. Do you punch him first? Do you try to quiet him down?
Okay.
Which is hard.
There are some education programs that also would be, that help the caregiver learn techniques to get out of the way. That's the idea. You have to get out of the way. You can't confront that. You have to get out of the way. And there are some ways to do that. And part of it would be a verbal intervention. Try to get their attention, redirect. And there may not, for some people and for some stages, there almost isn't anything you can do. I'm glad you asked that question. It is in your materials. How many of you are willing to pledge that you will go through every one of these slides? One of these slides talks about the importance of safety, not only safety from wandering. The Alzheimer's Association has a system for that, a button, a registry of the caregiver as well as the person that you care for. But also, do not hesitate to call 911. Your tax dollars at work. If you need 911, you leave the house and you call 911. Easier said than done, I know that. Here's something else I did because I learned it from somebody else. Go to your closest fire department. It may be the Central Fire Department. I live in North Richland Hills. There's 5 of them. I went down the street close to my mother's house, and I walked in. I always spent Sundays with her. And I walked in, and they're 24/7, but I walked in, and there was a young lieutenant that came out, and I said, I've learned about this. Would you please put into, I'll write it down. Actually, I had it written down. Would you please make sure that the 911 system, the dispatcher, has this information? And what it said is that at this address, my mother, her name, has this, and this going on. She didn't have Alzheimer's or dementia, but sometimes when she was taking a lot of medications, and that was causing a lot of disillusionment. But can you imagine, and he looked at me like I had 14 heads. This 20-year-old, he couldn't relate to that. But since that time, doesn't that make sense? If it pops up They know what they're walking into. And with the aging of America, there's more and more and more people with early onset. We baby boomers are aging. Anyway, think about that. That's in your slides. Okay, questions?
Other questions?
Can I ask you real quick, what one idea, I'm a trainer and an educator, I can't help myself, review, no quiz. What one idea did you learn today, or you were reminded today, that you know will be valuable? Redirect. Anybody else? What one idea? Yes, sir.
Don't take statin drugs. Don't take cholesterol-lowering drugs. Your brain is 95% cholesterol. And you need cholesterol. Your body makes cholesterol. So is there a connection?
Alzheimer's will not say that there's research for that. So I can't address that, sir. I can't address. You may have research that you can quote, and that's a personal preference that you have made, and we respect that. What one thing have you learned? Yes, sir.
Get a full evaluation, so I need to find out who we can go to.
Yes, yes. Do you live in Weatherford? Okay. University of North Texas Health Science Center, start there. And if not, Sherry Hall, I don't know how extensive, she may not have, the one in Fort Worth does everything. It's CAT scan, MRI, but she can have that done. You might want to start with her.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else?
Dr. Sherry Hull she's been here at the church several times. I've invited her as a guest to talk along these lines. And she is proactive with and one or two of the other pastor counselors that she will call us and give us a heads up on something.
And she really thinks outside the box, which is what you need anyway. Anybody else? What one thing did you learn? Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. One other thing, I wrote myself a big note. Here's the website that we have. I manage this one. It's been in existence since 2000, but it certainly didn't look like that. But there is a calendar of activities and events. And one of the things that's on this calendar is something called Caregiver Teleconnection. As you know, many education programs have been by Zoom. This one is free. All of these are free. This one is a telephone call. And I have guest speakers who are experts. Some of them I've never met. We have callers from all over the United States. But from the comfort of a caregiver's home. But look at that. Look at the calendar. Look at how many wonderful things. Anyway. Oh, there is. Oh, it's timed out. That's okay. Again, it's all in your information. But I provided the URL to our Alzheimer's Association for our family caregivers online. And what we've tried to do is put everything in one easy to follow, easy to use website. Because many of the associations, honestly, they're looking for money. They need money to operate. And sometimes they're hard to navigate, so we tried to simplify it. I know we went over. Hopefully you'll have a lot of information to walk away with. And wish me luck in breaking my husband's habit of wanting to stop my speech. We may have some interesting discussions in the future. Thank you, Donnie.
Thank you, Zender, for coming.